Welcome to 20 Tactics with me, James The Loremaster Lammin, where you join me for another instalment in our 8-part series focused on the tactics for the 8 laws of battle magic from the core rulebook. Today, we will be discussing the law of fire, and I'm going to begin by outlining how this video will be structured. Firstly, we will give an overview of the law of fire using our competitive rating system for laws of magic. Now this can be found on the rating system page on triplecrownwargaming.com, and it's the same system we use in our deep dive videos. Once we've established this, we will discuss getting the most out of the law of fire on your wizards. Finally, we will look at each of the armies which have access to the law of fire, covering maximising the law of magic within each of these factions. The law of fire is themed around manipulating this elemental force into delivering damage to your opponents. On the tabletop, this translates to plenty of direct damage and magic missile type spells, all of which have flaming attacks. That's not to say that the law of fire doesn't have augments or hex spells. In fact, they're arguably the standout spells in the lore. The law of fire doesn't grace the competitive gaming tables of 8th edition all that regularly, so let's take a brief look at each of the 7 spells and get this law's competitive rating to see if we can work out why that is. If you've not seen the rating system before, we'll give the law a score out of 24 based on the following 6 criteria: variety of spell types, power and frequency of the law attribute, average spell range, spell flexibility, average casting value, and the quality of the signature spell. Now let's begin with the law attribute, Kindle Flame. All spells in the law of fire are flaming attacks. In addition, if a direct damage or magic missile spell from the law of fire is cast on a unit that has already been hit by another direct damage or magic missile from the law of fire in this magic phase, the casting wizard adds D3 to their casting total. Okay, so the attribute is at best okay. It relies on you casting multiple spells to get the benefit, which in real terms will mean you need several casters or likely a level 4 caster to achieve that. Furthermore, the spells must all target the same enemy unit, which isn't always ideal. I mean, your first spell may simply wipe the unit out, so that can be challenging. Finally, it only triggers on about half the spells in the lore, which is quite frustrating, and worse still, doesn't trigger on some of the best spells in the lore. More on this as we go forward. Overall, it's not a great lore attribute. Its best combination play is likely dropping a base level fireball on a unit you would like to, say, Flamestorm later. On to spells now, and as ever we begin with the signature spell, Fireball. This is a magic missile with a range of 24 inches that inflicts D6 strength 4 hits on a cast of a 5+. This can be increased twice over, first to 36 inches of range and 2d6 hits on a 10+, and then to 48 inches of range and 3d6 hits on an 18+. The hits are flaming thanks to the lore attribute and can benefit from the attribute stacking of cast values, so it's a great spell because you can always take it. By and large, this spell will have some use in almost every game you play as well, and against certain opponents it can be devastating. It can have an impact on the game from turn 1 as well, and thanks to its low casting value is great on any level wizard. Like all magic missiles, it does suffer from you requiring line of sight and the caster being out of combat, but these are small prices to pay for consistent chaff clearance and incredible flexibility thanks to those 3 casting options. So, spell 1, and that's Cascading Firecloak. This is the first of 2 augment spells in the Law of Fire. This one is cast on a 5+ and affects the caster and their unit. Any enemy unit in base contact with them at the end of the magic phase suffers 2d6 strength 4 hits, which as always are flaming. It also remains in play spell. This spell's biggest drawback is that it's a bit situational in how it deals its damage. The wizard realistically needs to be in harm's way for it to deliver. Furthermore, it doesn't really have any synergy with the rest of the lore, as it doesn't trigger the lore attribute's additional casting total, and all of the other spells in the lore are kind of best employed at long range. That said, it shouldn't be completely written off. To start with, it has a very low cast value, and as it remains in play, it can potentially use some of your opponent's power dice if they've got units that are sort of being struck by it consistently. Also, it still takes effect if the wizard is in the second rank of the unit, so that helps to deliver damage with less risk. However, even with these points, it does remain a little bit disappointing. Spell number 2 is the Flaming Sword of Rhuin. This is the second augment spell and targets a friendly unit within 24 on a roll of 8+, or one within 48 on a roll of 11+. The unit gains magical flaming attacks and adds 1 to any to wound rolls it makes, both shooting and close combat. This is seen by many competitively as the best spell in the lore, even though it doesn't trigger the lore attribute. Adding 1 to wound rolls is frankly great. It also allows a unit that wouldn't normally be able to remove regeneration saves or damage ethereal units to do so. Furthermore, it's so versatile as it affects both shooting and combat attacks. What's even stronger is that with the Rulebook FAQ, this spell can allow units to wound automatically. So, quite frankly, it's a 1+ choice, really. You love to see it, is my general feeling on the Flaming Sword. Next up is spell 3, and this one is the Burning Head. The spell is a direct damage spell, so can benefit and trigger the lore attribute. You draw a straight line, 18 inches from the caster's front arc. Models touched by the line take a strength 4 flaming hit, and if a unit takes a casualty from this spell, they must immediately take a panic test. The length of the line can be increased to 36 inches on a cast value of 13+ as well. Now, thanks to the Rulebook FAQ, this spell can hit models in close combat, which does improve it. However, units in combat don't suffer panic tests and cannot be hit by any of the other spells in the lore, really, so that stops the triggering of the Kindle Flame. So it's a helpful FAQ, but not exactly synergy rich, shall we say. It's another strength 4 hit spell, which is a feature of this lore and really makes for a lack of variation in the spell's damage. If strength 4 isn't good against your enemy, then this is a really poor spell. Now, it's fair to say conversely, if it is, it's great. The panic is good, but it is situational. Number 1, that units foul panic. Doesn't happen that often with battle standards and items that improve leadership. And the spell has a relatively short range on the base value, which means you're probably going to want the wizard to be on a mount to get close, or you're going to be boosting the spell's casting range to get a lot out of it. On to spell number 4 now, Piercing Bolts of Burning. Back to Magic Missile, with a range of 24 inches and a cast of 10+, this spell does D3 hits per rank of 5 or more models in the target unit. Okay, so this one is possibly the worst spell in the lore, if I'm honest. If the unit you target doesn't have a rank of 5 or more models, the spell literally does nothing beyond letting your next magic missile or direct damage buff their casting value through Kindle Flame. Even against big regiments, the fact it only inflicts D3 hits per rank of 5 is real letdown. If you looked at like a sort of 20 model unit that was 5 wide, 4 deep, it will perform sort of averagely about as well as a mid-level fireball. However, the mid-level fireball can inflict damage on units with 5 or less models, so I would suggest this one is, at best, extremely situational. Fulminating Flame Cage is next. This one is a hex with a range of 24 and is cast on an 11+. The target unit immediately takes D6 strength 4 hits, those strength 4 hits again. Then, if the unit moves for any reason whilst the spell is in effect, every model in the unit takes a strength 4 flaming hit. Now that second part is what makes this an amazing spell. It can control the enemy's movement or punish them for trying to get into a better position. It does damage and doesn't require even Arc of Sight to do it, which is fantastic. It's just behind Flaming Sword of Rhuin for me as the second best spell in the lore. Certain armies can really benefit from this, and it also creates some really good internal synergy for the lore, as following this up with a Burning Head could result in a unit failing the panic test, running and then taking all the extra damage from Flame Cage. Oh, and you can boost the range of this spell to 48 inches on a very, very generous 14+. Last up, spell number 6 is Flamestorm. Back to direct damage now. This one uses a small template and targets an enemy unit within 30 inches. You place the template on the target and then scatter it D6 inches. Any model on the template immediately suffers, yes, you guessed it, a strength 4 flaming hit. It's cast on a 13+, and can be boosted to use the large template. If you do that, it does scatter 2d6 instead of d6, and its cast value is improved to 16+. So the cast value for boosting it doesn't go up much, and you should definitely be considering that if the enemy has got lots of tightly packed regiments. That said, with it only being strength 4 on the hits, it does feel like a massive disappointment. It can definitely do damage, but doesn't feel in line with many of the other kind of number 6 spells that you find in the main rulebook. It does trigger Kindle Flame and is a manageable cast value for even sort of a level 2 wizard, so in those terms perhaps it gets overlooked a little bit. Imagine your hero wizard dropping sort of potential 15 to 20 hits on an enemy unit because they rolled an 11 on some dice. That's not bad. So we've seen the Law of Fire, and we've seen that it has some powerful options, but it is unfortunately plagued by a real lack of versatility, which is compounded by its mediocre lore attribute that doesn't interact with the best spells. So let's get a rating score for the lore. It gets a 2 for the variety of spell types, a 2 for the power and frequency of its lore attribute. It does, however, get a 4 for its average spell range, a 3 for its spell flexibility, a 4 for its average casting value, and a 3 for the quality of the signature spell, giving this lore a surprising 18 out of 24. So let's move on to how we get the most out of the Law of Fire on your wizards. The lore rating is a little higher than I think many of us were expecting, and well, that would suggest that perhaps competitively the lore is being overlooked. Now, I think to an extent this is true, but we do need to explore this more as it is a little more complex than that. With this in mind, let's talk about the tactical tips you should remember when using the Law of Fire. Now, this section will be divided into 3 parts. General tactics, if you're using the Law of Fire, followed by some specific considerations for the level of wizard that you're using. So, maximising the Law of Fire on a level 4 and a level 2 respectively. In general, with the Law of Fire, you need to think about its practical uses. The lore is great at dishing out moderate damage consistently, and the more spells you have from the lore, the better results you will often get due to Kindle Flame. Its excellent range overall means that you don't need to worry as much about the wizard's positioning, but you must always remember to keep them at least in arc of sight, and due to the quality of the signature spell, realistically you probably want to make that line of sight. The spells like Flaming Sword of Rhuin and Fulminating Flame Cage also really improve the ranged elements of your army, with either +1 to wound on your shooting, or potentially controlling enemy units' movement with the latter. This moves me on nicely to my second point of general tactics. Your army construction is far more important with the Law of Fire than with other laws. If you build a fast-moving combat powerhouse, you will struggle to maximise the Law of Fire, as it is better at early turn bombardment with the Flaming Sword of Rhuin, bringing home a big late-game charge. So, it's better with a more defensive or shooting-based army, which may feel thematically a little bit odd. The army probably also wants one good combat unit to countercharge when the enemy gets close. This is one of the big reasons you don't see it that often competitively, as, well, those builds just aren't that common. Furthermore, as I mentioned a few moments ago, the lore is better the more damage spells you have from it. The best way to do that is to take multiple casters and perhaps spam the signature spell. Now, that's something you have to build in that costs you points, which may be another reason why you don't see the lore as often competitively, as it can become a bit points hungry to get the most out of it. Now, the final thing to consider in the general tactics is the order that you cast your spells in. It's very helpful if you can get your best damage spell off after another magic missile or direct damage spell to make the most out of it, in terms of like the Kindle Flame, making it harder for your opponent to dispel. But I must say that's not always easy to achieve. Also, don't forget that the Law of Fire wizards cause fear in cavalry and monstrous cavalry. It's not often game changing, but it is a nice bonus that you really shouldn't forget when placing your Law of Fire wizards on the table. Now, a word on the differences in tactics between a Lord level wizard with the Law of Fire and a hero level wizard, or if you like, a level 4 and a level 2. The issue with the level 4 wizard in this scenario is that it's a bit of a gamble. The level 4 is your best chance at getting Flaming Sword of Rhuin and or Fulminating Flame Cage, which are awesome spells And so taking a level 4 has that as a big benefit. Of course, it's also your best chance at rolling Piercing Bolts of Burning and Burning Head, both of which are pretty underwhelming spells to have on your primary spellcaster. As you can probably guess, it's almost always doing whatever you can to get one of those first 2 spells on the level 4, and almost always worth swapping one of either Bolts or Burning Head for the signature on your level 4. The problem with that is, doing that actively reduces the kind of lore attribute's effectiveness as well. This is why I'd argue the best way to employ this lore in general is on level 2 wizards. This gives you 2 chances to grab a juicy spell like Flaming Sword and always take multiple fireballs. It's not your main caster, and if you take a couple, you can use the signature spell to build the Kindle Flame rolling up. Crucially, it's also more guaranteed that way, as you know you have 2 level 2 wizards, you know you have 2 fireballs, because you can always swap for it. Both types of wizards should be treated as a bombardment piece whichever way you go. So, I'm going to move on to the final section now, and we're going to take a look at the tactics of the Lore of Fire with the specific armies that can take it. So, I'll take a brief look at each of the armies with the overall things to remember when using the Lore of Fire with them. So, if you like, this section is more practical pointers for the tactics we've already discussed, and there are quite a few armies for us to chew through. High Elves. Lore of Fire is unfortunately a little bit redundant on High Elves. In general, the army has plenty of great choices that do Lore of Fire's primary functions. For example, bolt throwers, reasonably strong ballistic skill shooting units, and access to Lore of High Magic on low-level wizards, covering the kind of similar bombardment elements with the signature spell from there, Soul Quench. That said, the Dragon Mage hero choice comes exclusively with the Lore of Fire and can create some great High Elf interactions with the lore. The Dragon Mage always knows the Flaming Sword of Rhuin, and this doesn't prevent him from also taking a fireball. So maximising the Lore of Fire is suddenly pretty easy, as if you take some Sisters of Avalon in a defensive High Elf list with the Dragon Mage, you can then apply the Flaming Sword of Rhuin to these Ballistic Skill 5, Strength 4 shooting powerhouses. Now that's pretty potent. Then, couple that with the bolt throwers and fireballs from the Dragon Mage himself, plus the dragon's breath weapon that the Dragon Mage is riding, and you have quite a powerful shooting army. The dragon also functions as a countercharge unit in the late game. Finally, if you're looking at this, you should strongly consider the Gem of Sunfire on the Dragon Mage. This makes any spells, shooting or combat attacks have +1 to wound rolls on the one turn of the game, so long as those attacks are also flaming, which, as you know, you've guaranteed Flaming Sword of Rhuin, so you can ensure that happens if you get the spell off. Dark Elves. Moving on to Dark Elves, and much of what we just discussed carries straight over. The Dark Elves also have many other options to do the type of role that Lore of Fire does, and unlike the High Elves, there is little debate that these options are better. Doomfire Warlocks with Doombolt being the obvious comparison to the Fireball signature spell. That said, if you are keen on the Lore of Fire on your Dark Elves, I think there is a stealth competitive build in there. I'd take plenty of Dark Riders and Doomfire Warlocks. I'd then take 2 or maybe 3 level 1 Fire Wizards, mounting them on Dark Steeds, and just take the Fireball on them. Place them into those fast cavalry units, and just run them around the table, allowing them to throw 1 dice in each magic phase at casting a base level Fireball. Combine that with your Dark Rider crossbows and plenty of points for Dark Shards, Bolt Throwers and Masters on Pegasi, and you've got a really mobile army with lots of damage potential. Although it's fair to say it is one that would possibly still struggle against really high armour or toughness. Wood Elves. I'll move on to Wood Elves now. And like the Dark Elves, placing wizards onto fast cavalry mounts with the Lore of Fire should definitely not be overlooked by Wood Elf generals, even if it seems a little unconventional. Now, unlike their dark kin, I think Wood Elves are one of the few armies that can really make a level 4 Fire Wizard work. I'd take units with True Flight Arrows, Sisters of the Thorn, Way Watchers and Wild Riders in this army list. Then, the crucial spells for the level 4 Lore of Fire Wizard are first and foremost Fulminating Flame Cage. This helps control enemies to stop them getting at your Glade Guard with True Flight Arrows, and will whittle them down if they choose to move whilst under the effects of the spell. The second most important spell is Flaming Sword of Rhuin. This is to improve the crucial shooting unit, and what it targets will be match-up dependent. So what I mean by that is, if your enemy is well armoured, then you would drop the Flaming Sword of Rhuin onto Way Watchers, using their no armour save shots. That suddenly is improved to also having no regeneration saves and +1 to wound. If the enemy is a tough monster, then you should be looking instead at a unit like Sisters of the Thorn, with poison shots, +1 to wound and flaming instead. Finally, you want Fireball to add more little and often damage to your Wood Elf shooting, and then ideally Flamestorm to drop some larger damage too. Ogre Kingdoms. Leaving the elves behind, I'm going to take a look at Ogre Kingdoms armies now. The Law of Fire can only be taken on a Firebelly hero, so the maximum level you can have in your army is level 2. The Law really brings a lot to an Ogre army, as beyond Leadbelchers and Man-Eaters, the Ogres don't have any conventional shooting. This means chaff clearance is often an issue for them, and they have to waste quality shooting from the aforementioned Leadbelchers or Man-Eaters to kill chaff instead, which isn't ideal. This is where the Law really excels. You can put the Firebelly into one of those 2 units to just drop fireballs on enemy chaff without wasting the better quality shooting. Also, Flaming Sword of Rhuin should also be taken if you roll it. Dropping that onto almost any Ogre unit is more powerful, from an improved Leadbelcher volley to automatic wounding Iron Guts. You love to see it. The Empire. I'm going to put this out there now. I think a level 1 or 2 Battle Wizard on the Law of Fire should always be on your Empire army list. I think it writes itself. Combine it with the Ruby Ring of Ruin to get 2 fireballs on the same model, and you have, in my opinion, the best chaff clearance available to Empire generals. Make no mistake, due to their poor ballistic skill and expensive missile troops, chaff clearance can be a big issue for Empire armies, so this guy really offers a lot. I'd look at placing him in a detachment of archers. This means he gets extra manoeuvrability from their skirmishers rule, will always be moving around to help preserve his line of sight, and will be easier to keep safe through positioning. Specifically, it will also help to stop him getting charged, to ensure that you get the maximum you can from him. I've got to be honest, I wouldn't consider a level 4 for Empire, as I think they have access to far better options in that department, laws that will offer more versatility to their army than Fire. But if you aren't running a light council, get that Fire Battle Wizard in your army list now. Warriors of Chaos. Like the Empire before them, the Warriors of Chaos have serious issues with clearing enemy chaff, and this is where those Law of Fire wizards really do sing. Having a level 1 wizard with Fireball is a real asset for a Warriors of Chaos army. Unfortunately, the love affair is a little short-lived, as the Warriors of Chaos are an army that likes to get into combat quickly. As we discussed in the general tactics section, armies that like to do that struggle to maximise the Law of Fire or feel the biggest benefits from it. Now, if you really want to go down a Law of Fire heavy wizard list, I'd take a Lord and 2 heroes on the Law of Fire, so that's a level 4 and 2 level 2s. I'd also take the Ruby Ring of Ruin and then 2 Hell Cannons in my rare slot. This allows the Chaos player to try to generate some real ranged output while blasting away with those spellcasters. You could pair this further with Throwing Axe Marauder Horsemen, who synergise nicely with the Flaming Sword, as do the Hell Cannons we just discussed. I'd finish the list off with some Chimeras flying around dropping their breath weapons before setting up final big counter charges in the late game. Points would be the pressing matter in this list, and whether or not it would perform better than a combat orientated list would also be another question. Chaos Dwarves, Legion of Asgore. Chaos Dwarves are very much like the warriors that we just discussed, insofar as they lack good chaff clearance choices, and a level 1 or 2 fire wizard fits that slot really well for them. Unlike the warriors, however, they are a ranged heavy army. Their artillery is incredible and only improved by Flaming Sword of Rhuin and Fulminating Flame Cage, to improve damage and slow the enemy. Multiple level 2 wizards with the Law of Fire really work well in this army, adding to the bombardment factor of the Chaos Dwarves. But, unlike other armies, Chaos Dwarves benefit most from the Law of Fire by aiming for one of the 2 spells we just discussed. In that case, I'd check out the Sorcerer Prophet on foot build from the competitive character series, but putting the Law of Fire onto that build instead of the Law of Hashut. That level 4 gives you the best shot at Flaming Sword and Fulminating Flame Cage, maximising your artillery presence on the battlefield. Lizardmen. Last but not least, we have the Lizardmen. Now, we've made it to the last faction, and if I'm honest, there isn't a great deal to say. Lizardmen don't really get much from the Law of Fire. The problem is that it's only available to a Slam Mage Priest, who has options that generally are just far better for him. They have a far larger impact across the entire army, for example, Loremaster of High Magic, or the Wandering Deliberations giving him every signature spell from the 8 Laws of Battle Magic. Their skinks mean that Lizardmen don't struggle to clear chaff, and the other fire spells beyond the Flaming Sword don't really combat their issues of poor initiative and poor weapon skill. If you are intent on taking a Slam Mage Priest on the Law of Fire, I'd say you should be aiming for Flaming Sword of Rhuin as your first choice to improve the Temple Guard or Saurus Warrior's output. After that, I'd be looking at taking Skink Priests with the Cloak of Feathers and another Skink Priest with the Arabian Carpet. Then use the Arcane Vassal special rule to cast those damage spells through the manoeuvrable Skinks. So after Flaming Sword, you should then be looking at getting Fireball, Flamestorm, and probably something like Burning Head. Or maybe Cascading Fire Cloak just to buff the unit that the slams in a little further. Overall though guys, I must say it's not the best choice for your Lizardmen. To conclude, I think it's clear that whilst the Law of Fire's 18 out of 24 rating is proof it can deliver a lot on the tabletop, you really do need to build your list around it. That said, I do think that there can be some unexpected gems in the Law of Fire, and it can't be understated just how good the signature spell is on a low-level wizard. As ever, please feel free to get in touch with us through our social media, or comment on the videos with your thoughts about the Law of Fire, and head back to the Night of the Realm mustering ground to check out all of our other exclusive content. I'll see you next time on 20-0 Tactics.
Remember to tag your friends and like, subscribe and share. Then head over to triplecrownwargaming.com and become a Knight of the Realm today.
What are you doing, mate?
You alright?
Do it for Warhammer!